let's say that we all go for a run or, a marathon. We're not gonna run exactly at the same pace. Most likely we're gonna have our own pace. And I think that's how relationships work too.
It's two people wanting to create this safe space for each other so we can heal.
Do you think men have more fear of commitment than women?
In my experience, yes. Like statistically speaking, yes, that's what I've seen.
Faith takes work, love takes work. Like, if you are gonna say I wanna remain faithful, you have to have boundaries to remain faithful.
A blessing and a curse at the same time because of the fact that you have to remain so strong and so grounded on what your true beliefs and your true values are, so that this flashy things that come around don't get your attention.
How can a man prepare himself? Because it's so common to hear the men saying, I got the one that got away. She didn't get away. You lost him because you were not preparing yourself to commit when the woman that you wanted to have with you showed up. So what advice can you give that woman and that man?
Welcome back to another episode of Into the Attic. I'm Karla.
And this is Vanessa. And today we have a great friend of ours.
I love it. And we're going to talk about all things, the topic that we love the most, actually.
The topic that can get women talking nonstop.
So much.
And for that, we have our friend Liza, acá conocida como Maro. Our dear friend, she's been also part of the Into the Attic gatherings. And thank you, Maro, for being here.
Thank you, guys. It's so special to be here. You were not just friends, but we're sisters in Christ and whatnot. And this is a very, I would say, spicy, hot, but very interesting topic.
Yeah. No, and I feel like, we are all about the relationships that we hold close, right? And one of the areas that we consistently do find ourselves talking about, and I want to say it's a lot of women do in different stages of their life, it's about romantic relationships, and I want to open it up. There's so much to talk about romantic relationships, but one of the things that we have seen as we have encountered ourselves here in Miami is that a lot of relationships we see that start very well, tend to, get going. And then at some point, it just kind of falls off, right? What has been your experience with that?
Well, what I've seen is that Miami culture is very much like, it starts very intense, right? Like, let's get ready for the party and the concert and the one thing next to the other. And I think that also translates to relationship. People start in the beginning with going from 0 to 100, but very soon after the first spike, it just starts like slowing down and crumbling. The commitment is not the one that you saw way in the beginning, or the responsibility, the passion, it starts to fade away. And I see it very much like this passion that people have for plans and social life in Miami. So I think that translates to relationships too, in my experience and what I've seen.
Well, first of all, I want to also share that you're a therapist, and also, as you can tell, she's a Latina. She's actually from Peru, just well, like as well as Karla. And what you're saying is so true. Like, relationship is starting. It's like everything is going great. We start like spending so much time together and so many activities. And Miami is a city that, if you go to Eventbrite, you can find all type of things to do. So, like, what looks like it's happening is that once the relationship starts getting deep, once you start seeing in the other person things that you're like, oh, I think we need to talk about these. That's when two people get scared, and the relationship, instead of like start to communicate more, they kind of start like drifting a little bit apart. Like, can you share not only your experience, but also like your experience as a therapist, speaking to other women? I'm sure friends, like, when you have a friend that is an attorney, you call him for some questions. If you have a friend that is, a therapist as well.
Share with us all the good stuff that you hear out there. And by the way, I think what you were sharing before was kind of like the honeymoon stage.
Yeah, very much so. Well, the metaphor that I love to use is when let's say that we all go for a run or, a marathon. We're not gonna run exactly at the same pace. Most likely we're gonna have our own pace. And I think that's how relationships work too. As much as you try to find someone who's very compatible to you, it doesn't mean that you both are gonna run exactly at the same pace. So one person sometimes in a different season may be walking and the other one running, or vice versa. the key is that this gap between the person who's walking and the one who's running, that cannot be way, that big, because that's when you see the relationship suffer, because this gap is so big. So you don't have to be exactly at the same pace, but you do need to have a gap where both people feel comfortable navigating and supporting each other. Because as I'm saying, one person can be walking in the next season, and it's so dynamic. And also for someone who's not very flexible or understanding, this may throw them off, and they may have this expectation of relationship is just sparkles and fun, and when the difficult time comes or the commitment comes, the conflict, exactly, they immediately freak out, and they're like, well, no, I didn't sign up for this, so I'm out.
No, and it is so true, because in the first part usually is full of dopamine, right? Like the newness of everything, and
the curiosity,
the fun, the curiosity,
like
and I think both parties do that very well. It's kind of like the adventurous part of the relationship, and at some point you start talking about other things. I mean, hopefully, we're in our 30s, and I mean, I'm the type of person that I'm more intentional about, what do I want to date for, right? In my case, I want to date for marriage. There's other people that want to just date for dating, right? But if you're dating with a purpose in mind, you're going to have certain conversations ahead of time. Hopefully you're going to have some conversations ahead of time. And I think that's so important, because if you both are not seeing as the same north, then the way that you are going to handle that relationship is going to look very different.
Absolutely. And then, by targeting those conversations earlier on, you're going to save a lot of time on the other person too. And I also think that's a way of demonstrating that you really respect the other person and their time, and all the emotional load that they can put into a relationship. But I also think that, yes, that is true, but on the other side of the coin, if we get too technical about it, we can also lose the opportunity of finding the joy and the fun and the excitement of the moment, and what you're having. Let's say, maybe you're in the middle of in the park, and you can be a little silly if you want, and you can, roll in the grass, whatever. And that is also bonding. That is also very special, as much as, hey, like, how do you handle finances?
So what you're saying, I love that you compare the pace of a relationship to people with running, because I love running. I run almost every day, and it's so true. Like, it's important to approach the conversation and see what is your pace towards, first of all, do we have the same goal? It's marriage. Okay, so what, good question to ask. Right. And then after that, like you kind of okay, so what's your pace? Like, how do you see these, happening in your life time-wise, right? Like, what are the things that you would like to experience with your partner before actually committing to a marriage? And I think, I love what you said, don't get lost in the technicality, because sometimes we can get so stuck into the goal of getting married that we may not even be asking ourselves the very honest question, is this the person that you actually want to marry? Because we're so into let's do the step by step so we can get there, that we forget about it. So can you share an experience that you have heard, or something about that?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people, especially, younger people, they have so much, illusion for marriage. And of course, it's something very exciting and that we prepare for so many years. But also I remember working with a couple who, they got married when they were very young. And of course, even though you made a commitment at that age, it doesn't mean that you're gonna, that is the version of you that is going to stay for the rest of your life. You're gonna grow up, especially if you start having kids, then you adopt a new role, a new identity, which is as a mom or a dad, and you start to get to know your spouse in a completely different way. And that can go one way or the other. You can even, fall even more in love for this new role that they adopt, or sometimes that when the disappointment or disagreements come in, and how do you navigate that, right? Because yes, that was not something you had a chance to see at that point when you got married, but that you need to be prepared to see those things and those conversations coming down the road, so that it doesn't get you as a surprise, right? So I remember working with this couple. They got married very young, but their careers, priorities, and even parenting styles started to differ pretty widely, and they, came to me to work in some like marital and couple issues, and it was like me helping them to get to know each other again. So rather than taking steps forward, we were taking steps backwards. And I say this in quotes because it was kind of like going back to the phase of like, how do you like the breakfast in the morning? Like basic stuff that you would ask when you're earlier in the beginning stages of a relationship. Sometimes we lose that. And we have to keep in mind that we as human beings, we're going through different developmental stages. And every time we jump into the next developmental phase or stage, you gotta reconnect with your partner and take the time and intentionality to get to know them at that stage, and vice versa. So it has to be both ways.
Yeah. I think there's something beautiful about holding space for each party to feel safe. And one of the things that I've experienced, in the relationships, is this whole thing of, sometimes life happens, and there's this whole process of people becoming avoidant. And in the other sense, like anxious attached, right? And this, I'm sure you've heard all these attachment issues,
styles,
and I don't think there's one right or wrong. I think we're more prone to, each one of them, but I think at some point they could get really out of hand if you're not really aware where you are at that moment, right? Can you like share a little bit more about what you've seen in those type of attachment styles?
Absolutely, and I think it takes intentionality in us getting educated on that, first of all, because maybe some people may be listening and being like, what is that?
What do you mean attachment?
So there's actually a book that I highly there's a book that I highly recommend reading about this topic, and it's called Attached. That's literally a title of the book. And what I like about this book is that it has a quiz that you can take so that you find out what's your attachment style, and also it has quizzes so that you can learn what's the attachment style of your partner or even ex-partners that you have had. And then it gives you like diagrams and visuals so that you can see which style goes best with another and which ones don't go along very well. So you start to get yourself educated on the topic, first of all, because I think with awareness comes change. What we ignore and what we do not know, we won't be able to change. So I think that's a step number one. But going back to your point of attachment and these patterns, I think we first need to be fully aware and then be willing to put on the work. And that's when most people quit.
Question towards that. How early it is, I don't want to say the word okay, acceptable. How early should a couple start going to therapy together? Because some people will be like, we're only 6 months into a relationship and we need therapy. Maybe we should just quit. But like, what's your approach on that?
Or sometimes people may take that as something is wrong, right? And that doesn't, like when we go to a doctor, hopefully we'll go to a doctor once a year to prevent stuff. So I hate to see that some people have like this negative connotation to therapy when my hope is that that changes. I don't think there's like a right or wrong time or a specific time when it's quote unquote too early or in the process. I think as long as one of the person is intrigued and is interested, the other person should match and be willing to dive in. Because that if that's not the case, then one person is having that desire unmet. And that's when that starts to open up the door for what other things I'm going to verbalize. Like I'm being encouraged enough to tell you that this is a desire, or this is something that I want. And the response that I'm getting is unwillingness to go there and dive, deep. So I think there's no, a specific answer. I've seen couples going to therapy when they were like 4 or 5 months in a relationship, or marriages who have been married for years and they have kids, and it's been 20 years down the road and they go to therapy for the first time and they actually regret not doing it earlier. So
when I think about relationships, that are successful, I always see two people wanting to make it work, and two people doing the work.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes love is definitely not enough. You could be extremely compatible, and life will still hit you, and you will react in different ways. And it takes two parties to be able to tango, So when I think about that, it's like the ongoing dance, right? Okay, we're in this together. Like, it might be conflict, it might be, you know, a valley in the relationship and whatnot. But, you know, even going to therapy is a choice of two people, you know, wanting to make it work, right? And when somebody is not there, or, you know, like you said, you don't have to be at 100%. Both of them have to be at 100%. Maybe one is at 80, the other one's at 20, or, you know, one is at 50, 40, 60, you know, and that's okay, you know, but at least there's that willingness to, you know, hey, we want to figure this out because we want to make this work, right?
Yeah. And I think it's also important to define why the willingness, and more than the curiosity. I think like it's two people wanting to create this safe space for each other so we can heal. Because I think we've been in relationships, and we've been in relationships where we also learn so much about ourselves while also learning so much about our partners. And also like we come to this realization that we are healing through relationships. The more intimate a relationship, the more we find the areas that there needs to be work, but there also needs to be this kindness of I care about that in you, and I want to be part of the journey of you healing that.
Yeah.
And not everybody's ready for that, right?
Exactly.
Not everybody's ready, like you were saying before, like go into the 6 months, you know, and then the conflict starts, and the first thing that they say, like you said, it's I'm gonna run. Like, you know, the desperation of just not dealing with something, and you just want to walk the other way, and then you have to deal with like, okay, I have to actually confront this, right? How, in your perception as a therapist, and then you can tell me personally, you know, how do you do that? You know, what is the best way for somebody that's like having this inner battle, right? Of like, should I run? Should I stay? Should I, you know, what are those things that you need to think about first and make an actual decision if it's good to, you know, continue working on the relationship or just leave it?
Yeah, I think boundaries would be very important to have it clear when it comes to that. You need to know when enough is enough. You need to know what are your non-negotiables. You need to know what is the type of relationship that you want to have and that you want to live in. And if you see that those behaviors or dynamics are not matching that, then why continue, right? And then that's when the courage really needs to come in. And even sometimes, you know, fear. There's a lot of fear involved of, if I say no to this person, then does that mean that that's the end, right? Or would I not have more opportunities out there? Or in cases of long relationships, you know, people think of, I've invested so many years of my life already. I would rather just stay and somehow make it work rather than starting from scratch. And there can be 1,000 different reasons as to why people, even though they know the answer of maybe this is it, like I should leave, their behaviors don't match necessarily what their thoughts are. And that is a work that requires accountability on our parts, on our individual parts. And I also wanted to go back to what you said of, you know, sometimes love, it's not enough. And I was hearing a podcast of Quinlan and Jay Shetty, and Quinlan was talking about the difference between love as a feeling and love as an action. Love the feeling or love the action. And I think that was so very well said and very well put, because usually when we think of love as a feeling, but really what we want to see in our partners being demonstrated to us is love as an action. Of course, the feeling is nice, the feel is the fuel, but the action is what will sustain it.
Just like beautiful. Faith takes work, love takes work. Like, you know, if you are gonna say I want to remain faithful, you have to have boundaries to remain faithful. If you want to say I want to love this person, then you need to have work together. And I love that you said this word, the bonding part of a partner. There's actually the Gottmans. They're really good at speaking about the beats of connection between two people. And I think like sometimes even in a city like Miami, I don't know if you can tell me more your experience, your personal experience, but also like what you have heard in different couples. Like, I think Miami is a city that seems that wants to connect us, but kind of tends to disconnect us more because of so much happening here. And how can a couple, how can a partner that right now is listening to us having this conversation, work on the bits of connection and work on the bonding? Like you were saying, maybe just go to a park and lay down and look at the clouds. Like, how can a couple remain present in a city that it's so busy like Miami?
Yes, I would say really find out what are the values that you both have in common and nurture those. Don't just say it verbally and put it on a piece of paper, but actually make your actions and activities be congruent with those. And when I say values, that doesn't mean, or they can mean like honesty and, you know, the most famous action values, but they can also be like, you can value entertainment. You can value humor. You can value, you know, it doesn't have to be so serious. It can be those things as well, and that's completely valid. And if so, for instance, if one person values adventure, then that is something that I think needs to be expressed, needs to be verbalized, because something that I've also both experienced and seen is that we wait for some reason for the other person to find out what's important for us or to figure it out. You know, we have these core beliefs of like, oh, they should know.
Right.
If they're with me, then they should know. Or we've been for X amount of years, then they should know. And that is just not the reality. So we need to be verbal and say, hey, this is something that really makes me feel alive. This is something, let's say, if, you know, if traveling is, you know, what I really value, you know, once a year, I gotta verbalize that so that me and my partner can make that work and make that happen. But if I just keep it to myself and I just, you know, feel upset that my expectations are not being met, I think at that point is unfair because you start to build resentment in silence. And then the other person doesn't even know that your expectations are not being met just because of a lack of communication.
So here comes a question, and it might be very targeted to men, but I want to ask it because I feel like it comes more from the men's side. Do you think men have a fear of commitment?
I would say some men do. I wouldn't put every man on a bucket because I have also met women who are afraid of commitment.
Do you think men have more fear of commitment than women?
In my experience, yes. Like statistically speaking, yes, that's what I've seen. And
what do you think that is?
I think because there is this illusion. I think there's a variety of reasons, not just one. One of them, let's say if we focus on like South Florida, Miami, the environment, the entertainment, the you know, there's so many people coming in and out, and there's always this expectation of like there's so many options out there. You know, social media, and there's so many factors that can play into that illusion. And so they may not see it worth in investing in one relationship when they think they can have so much more. Or, you know, if I get a nice car or whatever, then I'm gonna have the girl that I want. And they stay like that surface level and they don't dive deep. Versus women, we tend to value more the emotional connection, and even if we may not be attracted to the men, you know, like, you know, at the very first impression, that is something that can get built with time. Versus men, they are driven more for their senses, what they see.
So everything comes through the eyes. I feel like we're more emotionally connected, you know, and I heard somebody said that when you have too many distractions around, which, you know, from everywhere, right? Like the cars, the women, the this and that, it's really hard for you to be able to focus on one thing, you know, and it's you know, it's kind of like a blessing and a curse at the same time, because of the fact that, you know, you have to remain so strong and so grounded on what your true beliefs and your true values are, so that this, you know, flashy things that come around, you know, don't get your attention, you know, then sticking to, you know, what's important.
Something else that comes to mind is that we, like as women, if being a mother is something that we, you know, strive for, we want, then we feel that this biological clock is maybe not always on our side. Versus men, they're like, oh no, it's fine. Even if I'm on my 40s or 50s, it's fine. Like they have that as a pro, and unfortunately they may take that, you know, in that way, and that also keeps them, like it gives them a pass from.
I'll tell you something though, I've seen this from men that are very driven. I haven't seen this, like for example, I come from Sarasota, which is another city outside of Miami. I would say like your regular, American household, whatnot. And I don't see that in men. Like they have this progression in life where, you have a girlfriend, you love your girlfriend, you feel like it's a good time, you do it, right? But there's no this like, I have a lot of time left in my life for me just to, start a family.
But I think they're also driven men. I've seen very successful men living in Sarasota or Jacksonville. I don't think it's about a man being driven. If anything, a man that is driven is going to say, I need a woman to build with, because you understand that the house front is as important as the front. Yeah. Like the work and everything they do outside. So I think it's more culturally in Miami. But why would you say, Well,
I wanted to, because of the fact that you're saying this in Miami, because, what you see the perception is in Miami is that I have to have the car, I have to have the apartment, I have to have the flashy life, like all these things that probably cost a lot more money than just living in, some other area.
In partnership, a woman can help you build your family and also help you build a legacy. So I think it's more about the men and the culture in Miami. So my question is, how can a woman recognize, for example, when a man, even if they're saying, I want to get married at some point, how can a woman recognize when a man has commitment issues? And then also, how can a man prepare himself? Because it's so common to hear the men saying, I got the one that got away. She didn't get away. You lost him because you were not preparing yourself to commit when the woman that you wanted to have with you showed up. So what advice can you give that woman and that man?
Yes, I think discernment becomes very key, and then discernment is not something that unfortunately we can go to a store and buy. A little bit of discernment, right? Experiences are going to teach you a lot, past relationships and role models, and even what you consume. What TV shows are you watching? What type of music are you listening to? What are your friends talking about? How is the people closest to you, whether it's friends or family, what are their perceptions and what have they been feeding you with? And how is that being reflected on how you approach relationships or what you think of relationships? Because really all your behaviors are just a demonstration of what your thoughts are, whether you are aware or you're not. And that's what's interesting when people are not aware and they just start, developing all these patterns, and then you start questioning yourself, why I'm like trapped in this pattern over and over again. Well, you may need to pause and go deeper and, peel off the layers until you find what are those things in the root really causing it. But I would say that you can predict, right? Because you don't buy, it's not like buying something with like a warranty and you pay a little extra so you have the warranty, but you can predict at your best of your capacity when you see how the person behaves in the little things, in the smaller scenarios. That is honestly your only way of trying to see how they're going to be in the bigger scenarios. So for instance, going back to when we were talking before, let's say that I tell my boyfriend, hey, I think, I'm interested in going to therapy. And if he's like reluctant to it immediately, without even asking me like why or what's beneath that, then that can be already something that tells me, about him and some defensiveness that maybe he has towards certain topics. Of course, that doesn't mean that our tolerance needs to be zero and the first moment we catch something, we're out. That's not the whole point. But of course, it's something that you need to notice and bring it up for conversation. You can even ask, hey, like I noticed, there was not a lot of willingness from your part. Can you tell me a little bit more? Or where's that coming from? So it's just a matter of unpacking really everything on both sides.
Do you think... is there like a good timeline for somebody to date before marriage?
Like, you mean how long the dating phase before marriage? No, I don't think there's a right time or not. I've seen couples who are happily married and they dated for like 2 or 3 months. Oh, wow. Yeah, and I've also seen marriages, coming to an end even if they dated years. So I don't think time would be our best indicator, but I would say how deep or the depth of the relationship. And not even that, like sometimes there was a lot of intentionality, sometimes there was a lot of depth, and still that was not sufficient for everything to align and really be, enough to be sustainable over time.
So question, is it true that when you know, or when a man knows, he knows as well?
Yes, but I would be curious to know what they think they know.
Yeah.
Like, yes, they can say, when you know, but what do you think you know? Because if you think that love is feeling the butterflies in the stomach and just getting,
sparkles.
exactly, or, finding someone super cute and having fun, and that's it, then you only know what you think you know.
Yeah.
So, I would go way beyond that. But I think that when you have, or when you feel safe, when you feel heard, when you feel seen, when you feel respected, that takes you a long way on a relationship.
I feel like you have to be on a give and give, right? When you're consistently like giving to the other person, and giving to yourself first, of course, because you can't pour from an empty cup. But giving to the other person is like you're not self-seeking. You're thinking about the other person, because sometimes we come from this idea, men especially. I mean, I want to say, because I feel like they want peace. They just want peace. They want to be supported and they want to feel peace. Great, but are you giving peace to the other person? Because if you're not, then we're kind of like mirrors, right? Like if your life is chaos, guess what? The other person can only give you so much peace, before that person lives in chaos too.
Absolutely.
So it's like it's kind of like you have to be consistently conscious that you want to be able to be a healthy individual. And the other person as well, so that you both can be pouring into each other. Is it going to be all the time exactly the same? No. There's going to be situations where one is going to be able to, kind of hold the weight a little bit more than the other. But as a whole, it should be a team, right? It should be like an ongoing pouring of both.
Absolutely. It's dynamic, and that never stops. It doesn't matter how many years you're into a marriage, that dynamic doesn't actually, or should not, change, because the moment it changes and one just keeps holding onto or making the relationship work, then the other, that's when resentment starts building, and that's not going to lead us to absolutely any positive way. So it's a matter of you becoming the partner that you want to have, because the other person will mirror that and will give you what you're given. So it's unfair to expect or to request or to ask something from your partner that you're not even given on the very first place.
Correct. Yes, and absolutely, and I think that's why therapy and mentorship is. I think they both go together.
Oh yes,
I have a therapist, but also have a mentor, and I think it's so important because first the work has to be done in ourselves, within ourselves, because that's even going to help us recognize when we are in a relationship where we are not able, like we are just simply not able to see in the other person, like, okay, we are aligned, our values are aligned, he's an amazing person at, he's doing great things, but as an individual, when it comes to partnership, we're not building together. And I think like in a city like Miami that we're all building. Like Karla does more besides her job and besides into the attic, me as well, and you as well. So in a city that we're constantly building, how can a couple or a partner start building together in a way that is also healthy, steady, in a pace that works for both of them?
Yeah, that will be dictated by every single couple in a very unique way, really, because no relationship is the copy of another relationship. So that is something you get to build a culture of the relationship. Just the same way when you have a family and have kids, you get the chance to build a culture. Or when you're leading a job, you get to build a culture of that work placement. But it is important to know that when you come in a relationship, then there's this third person or this third entity that is born. So it's you, your partner, and the relationship. And that relationship, it's literally a completely separate third entity. So in that relationship, sometimes person A's needs are not going to be met fully, and person B is not going to be met fully, but how can we meet halfway? for the sake of the relationship. And I think that type of mindset is not something that everybody has, but it's something that you certainly need to develop if you want to make that a lasting relationship.
I saw a reel that went viral, I guess, that said, this was a girl saying that if your partner doesn't support your vision 100%, leave them right now because it's not gonna last. You know, and I had my views on that. I was like, you know, I think you should always believe in your partner and like their dreams and aspirations and whatnot, right? But what does 100% mean? You know, like, is it 100% I have to be there with you and then not have an opinion on how you're doing things, you know? Or 100% means that, you know, can I meet you at 75%? I still have my life and I still support you, you know, but I'm not just gonna drop everything, drop everything and, you know, just be there with you. Like, you know, what does 100% mean? So what do you think about that? Like, what does supporting your partner means, you know, especially when it comes to your vision, you know, and what you're planning for the future?
Yeah, I think at the core, I agree with that statement of you being your partner's best cheerleader. Like, you have to genuinely feel happy when they, when they're successful or when they're achieving their dreams or they're living their dreams. Absolutely. I think that should be the case because a partner should be also your best friend. So the same way you would get happy for your best friend, you should do it for your partner. However, you know, that this is when we get into the nuance. You know, what does that 100% look like? And you even said the resources, like
time,
exactly, finances, time. So setting boundaries when. Like, for instance, you guys, like, you're running a whole podcast, and I'm sure there's some boundaries to it. Like, there's no way you're gonna miss one day of work and you to record. You know, that's a no. So there's some boundaries and there's some rules that you both had to come into agreement to make this work. And so you can still maintain both of your jobs and do this beautiful project. So the same way would work in a relationship. Okay, you have this dream, you have, and I'm all about it to support you. But let's talk about it. Let's define where's the line. And once that line, or once we feel that we're approaching the line, what's our course of action? So even if you're not there yet, you gotta prepare for what the things are that could possibly come. And how are we gonna act?
And how do you, as a girlfriend or, you know, as a partner, are becoming part of that vision too, especially if you're trying to build together? Because you know, in a world where, you know, we're entrepreneurs and like driven people and we want to get somewhere and we want to build businesses and we want to, you know, build this whole thing, right? There's obviously, you can get there in 2 years, you know, alone, right? Or you could get there in 5 years, you know, in a relationship that you're also working on, right? There's options, right? There's total options, but I think you have to come to a consensus of what is more important to you. You know, do you want to get to this place so fast, you know, on your own alone, or do you want to get there, with the person that you love? And both take time, because a relationship within a partnership that has a huge vision that takes a lot of time commitment sometimes can get rocky, right?
Absolutely. And not just if you want to get there, but how do you want to get there? Because you can get there and have no resources and be fully disconnected from your friends, and maybe your health is not at the best, and maybe you're sleep deprived, but you made it there. So at that point, and you know, I'm not pointing fingers, but for me, that wouldn't be, like, I would rather not make it there.
Right.
If
What
that's
is your
the cost.
definition of success?
Exactly,
Right, yes,
exactly. So it's not just making it, but how do you want to make it, and what is that journey is going to look like? And if the person is honest and tells you, yes, you know, my plan is to not sleep and not, you know, skip all, neglect completely my social life. If you're up for it, then you know, but I think it has to be discussed and it has to be expressed, because otherwise you're signing up for something that you may not be fully all about it for. So yeah.
There's a scripture that I love, you know, when it comes sometimes to not only men, but like women as well, that talks about, you know, sometimes how much desires in our hearts we have to strive for things, you know, and get to a certain place. For what shall it profit a man if he should win the whole world, yet he loses his own soul? And that's something that I have consistently, like, always reminding myself, you know, in anything that I do, in work, in community, in family, because sometimes we have all these dreams and aspirations and we want to get there, and we probably can't get there, with our own strength, we probably can. But what happens with your soul in the middle of that? What happens with the people that you love around that? What happens with your family? What happens, like you said, with your own health? So that's beautiful.
Yes, I think it's very popular, especially men saying, oh, I would die for my wife, or I would die for my kids, or I would die for my family. And I saw this on an Instagram post, that these phrases are very well known, but would you sleep for your wife, or would you rest for your family? Would you take a break? Would you take a break? And that is really the hard thing, because we all love to dream, we all love to have projects and goals and visions, but would you do it in a way that it's sustainable for your own sake and really for the sake of the people who love you and are close to you?
And even as Christians, we know that taking to like general relationships, like in order to love others, we need to love ourselves first, because nobody can pour into others from a already empty or almost empty tank. And at the same time, I believe that it's also a little bit self-centered, like I'm the one who is sacrificing, I'm the one who's willing to die, when it's more like, how can we not get to a place that we have to die, but how can we right now, like you were saying, prevent the issues, or prevent, or like even talk about if we're both gonna build, what pace are we gonna build it, and also very key, the commitment once you're married. There's one thing that Matthew McConaughey said that I was like, oh wow, like I loved it. He said, like, I had to understand that sometimes there's gonna be seasons that I'm gonna be sprinting and running, while my wife was just barely able to walk. She was going through her own thing. And what am I gonna do? Am I just gonna continue with the vision and the goal and just like run and continue sprinting, or am I gonna know that it's important to slow down so I can be able to grab her hand? And that's a commitment part. And I love that. So what advice would you give right now to a couple, or even a single woman, like I said, or a single man that is listening to us right now, to start working, to start creating this awareness of how important it is to believe that, like the Bible says, like, when one falls, the other one is able to lift them up. The importance of partnership, and then the work that is needed for a relationship, but also the commitment.
I would say start small, start from what is within your reach. Start with the relationships that you currently have on the plate, whether those are friendships. That's a really good way of, developing those skills. Because ultimately, it's all skills, willingness, and it takes practice. Nobody, we have never taken a course at school or at, college, and this is how you date, or this is how you are a good partner, this is how you maintain a relationship long term. Like, no, these are all things that we navigate, and we also got to do it with a lot of self-compassion as well, because we may be coming from a good place, a good intention, and we may still mess up things. And then at that point, how are you forgiven towards yourself, and how do you learn and grow? So I would say always keep a growth mindset. I'm very big on education, so reading a book, listening to a podcast, or talking to people that you admire. Find someone, a mentor, who is a couple of steps ahead of you that you would switch places with. Don't ever take advice from someone you wouldn't be able to switch place with, and just ask, hey, how's been your journey, or I'm in the middle of this situation. Give me a word of wisdom. But you also got to be very selective who you go to, because that can be a double-edged sword. As much as that can nurture you, that can also harm you. Absolutely. So
Well, Maro, it's been amazing, so refreshing to have a conversation with you on a topic that, like, we know we can go an hour, sometimes even two, talking about.
A sleepover.
For real. And there's just so many areas, to even like go into, but it's been so great to have you here today.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, girls, so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being one of the girls that comes into the Annie gatherings. That means a lot, to continue to show up for others. Like you were saying, practice with your friendships, how to be vulnerable, how to how to support each other during this journey when it comes to dating. Okay, well, thank you so much, Maro.
Thank you.